Good morning and welcome to Veterans Heartbeat on the Pulse of the Veteran, where we discuss issues of health, happiness, opportunity, and well-being of interest to the veteran community, their families, and the community who honors them.
Good morning and welcome to another episode of Veterans Heartbeat, brought to you by River, the Rural Institute for Veterans Education and Research. My name is Jason Zencraft. My co-host Ed Lasofsky is here with me, and he is the Executive Director of River. We welcome you to a weekly wide-ranging discussion of issues, events, opportunities, and needs in our veteran community. Morning, Ed. How you doing?
Morning, Jason.
We'd also like to thank our sponsor, Farside Signs. They create amazing-looking vehicle graphics that will drive traffic to your business. They are located at 1526 South Avenue West in Missoula. Follow them on the web, Instagram, and Facebook, or just stop on by.
Good morning. This morning on Veterans Heartbeat, we have Jim Dolan from Illinois. And Jim, you want to identify what your title is with Illinois Joining Force?
Sure, Ed. First of all, thank you for having me on. Illinois Joining Forces is the statewide entity in Illinois. I am the Senior Director of Development and have been with IJF since the very beginning, formed in 2012.
You're pulling together basically a large task force to help the veterans in Illinois. Is that correct?
Ed, what we're trying to do is identify existing task force, people that are doing stuff at the community level. So we are pulling them together, trying to connect them to one another. And our objective is to try and make sure that we have partners and collaboratives at the community level throughout the state so that there are no gaps in services to veterans and their families.
Can you explain your program a little bit more to us?
Happy to. So, as I said, Illinois Joining Forces was formed in 2012, and at the time, the idea was to create this one-stop shop for veterans and their families. It was a great concept. In fact, it's caught on around the country. Every state in the union is trying to do this. But at the very beginning, we had a website where we thought if we put up resources on that website, veterans and their families can navigate and they can get to the services that they need. And it was a laudable idea, but it was a tactic and a tool, and it wasn't a strategy. So we pivoted to what I call our ground game, where we are identifying the support communities throughout Illinois and connecting to them based on the premise that services are best rendered closest to home. So we are going around the state identifying organizations that have come together, community partners, in other words, people who are pulling together, sharing resources, sharing best practices, and supporting those collaboratives. And we're seeing it be effective. Veterans and their families are community members. And so these community resources, these community partners are in the very best position to deliver services and to provide support for veterans and their families.
Can you give us some examples, Jim?
Well, I was just with one of our best partners in Lake County, which is in the northeast corner of Illinois. They're responsible for Lake McHenry County and a little bit of Wisconsin. And it really mirrors the catchment area for the James A. Lovell Federal Health Care Center. And what they've done over the last 6 years is pulled together community partners of all kinds. They have about 80 partners in their network, and they vary from people that provide education support, employment assistance, behavioral health, all of the various things that veterans and their families need, they have within their network. They meet every other month to share resources, talk about upcoming events, make sure that the gaps or the issues that veterans are facing are being addressed. So we refer to them as our gold standard. They've done two very important things, Ed, over the years. The first thing that they've done is that they went out and got those partners. They talked to the community, and they had a pretty broad scope, they didn't just talk to organizations that were veteran-centric or that had veteran programming or veteran in their title, the usual suspects. They talked to all community providers, and they made sure that they had all of these bases covered so that veterans could get the services that they need. So they pulled together those partners, and that partner network is growing and becoming more cohesive. The other thing that they did that was really wise, and it's the thing that kind of ties everything together, is that they recruited combat veterans and paid for them to be professionally trained peer support specialists. They have 5 combat veterans who have been trained, and they're the point of the spear. They're the tip of the spear. They're the ones who are getting the calls from the veterans and the families, and they're the ones who can help to navigate through those 80 partners. So partner development and peer support were the keys to their success, and they've done a fantastic job, and we're using them as the gold standard as we go around the state to help these other communities develop a similar network.
What kind of training and peer support did they receive?
The organization that, at the moment, at least here in Illinois, that seems to be providing the best training is DBSA. It's the Depression and Bipolar Support Alliance. I believe I've got that acronym right. But the DBSA does a full week intensive training, 8 to 5. One of our staff members just went through it. We wanted to be able to make sure that we had firsthand knowledge as to how good it is, and he thought it was fantastic. They not only go through the training in terms of lessons and so forth, but they do role playing to make sure that the person who's being trained is comfortable sitting with someone and saying the words or just listening. So DBSA has been the go-to organization here. We've got another organization that has been approved by the Illinois Certification Board. It's an outfit out of Milwaukee called Dry Hooch, run by a Vietnam veteran, Bob Curry, and he put together a great program that does a similar type of training. Really is to give the veteran, and they have to be a combat veteran. They have to be somebody who has had the experience, who can say that they've walked in somebody else's shoes. That peer support is the key. We believe it's always been and will always be the very best way, because it's based on the sound principle of shared experiences. Nobody can relate to a combat veteran as well as a combat veteran. And it doesn't have to be just combat. Somebody who's been in the military is far better able to relate to somebody who's been in the military than a civilian. And I'm a civilian, and I can take the veterans that I work with only so far. So we believe that peer support, and it's backed up by our partners around the country who say that peer support is the glue to this whole thing. Peer support is the thing that will be the answer as we recruit more veterans to serve their brothers and sisters.
It's kind of funny you brought that up. It wasn't something that I was expecting as a topic this morning. 5 years ago, we started teaching cognitive behavioral therapy in our programs to the veterans, and it works. We've got a book that I will share with you when we get off the air by Dr. Jeffrey Cook. Dr. Cook is a combat veteran that went on and got his clinical psychology degree. But he wrote a book that all the combat vets can work through and work through a lot of their issues. The one key that we're missing, and the point that you should be looking at, is, you talk about the families. The peer support level at the family level, we have found, has been key in training the wives so that they can support other wives or significant others. I shouldn't just say wives. In that the wives are going through hell with what's going on sometimes.
No, it's a great point. We oftentimes the veterans get the attention, and it's the family that is in the greatest need. It's also often the family that comes forth first because they're the ones that see the struggles and are reaching out. So family support is key to what we do. When we go out in the community, we talk. So I'll just back up a second. Illinois Joining Forces, as I said, was established in 2012 by legislation, but there was no funding behind it. If anybody's been to Illinois or knows anything about Illinois politics, we're in worse financial shape than California. So there was no funding behind it. There was no staff. So it languished for a couple of years. But what we recognized was that we had an obligation as a state entity to serve all comers. So Illinois Joining Forces serves all eras, all branches, all manner of discharge, service members, veterans, and their families. So when we mean all, when we say all, we mean all. And the family is the one area where they're the least amount of resources. You can't get resources from the VA for the family for the most part. So the community has to step up, and you're absolutely right. They need peer support training to be able to pull together wives and significant others, partners and such, to be able to support one another because they're going through the same level of trauma but at a different angle. They need a different kind of support from one another, and because it goes back to the principle. They are peers with one another, and they can relate to one another. So supporting the family, especially the wives, is absolutely essential. And I'll tell you something else. One of the things, we're taking an all-hands-on-deck approach to this. And not to get preachy, but when we go out into the community, we often quote Lincoln from his second inaugural, where he said, "We are to bind up the nation's wounds. We are to care for him who may have borne the battle, and for his widow and his orphan." And in my heart, I do not believe that Lincoln was talking about the VA. He wasn't talking about a federal bureaucracy. He was talking to every citizen in every community in every state that we are to bind up the nation's wounds. We are to care for he who may have won the battle and for his widow and his orphan. We are supposed to do it at the community level. So we're really serious about making sure that we have an all-hands-on-deck approach. So when we talk about peer support, we talk about multi-level peer support. Anything from a battle buddy who just wants to drive a veteran from one appointment to the other or to a job interview, that's peer support. To somebody who wants to get trained to become a peer support specialist so that they can dive deeper into the issues and have the confidence that they can be of assistance. To somebody who may want to take it on as an avocation or a career and gets the certifications necessary to be compensated. To me, this is laudable work, and people ought to be compensated for it if they're going to dedicate themselves to it. So we're looking for peer support in all forms, battle buddies, professionally trained peer support specialists, you name it. We want all hands on deck.
Let's talk about the funding, because as we all have experienced, the funding from the VA can be very political. Recently, I was reading an article. They had the guy in charge of all the entrepreneurial programs for our region was out of Denver, and he was arrested for taking kickbacks. So where do we get the funding to pay for these guys? Because that's key.
It is. There's, everything has a cost to it. So we've been, and we're trying as we go along to answer that very question. And we have a couple of ideas, and we have had some success in a couple of areas. One is an organization called NVI, National Veterans Intermediary. They're funded by the Woodruff Foundation for expressly this purpose, to connect and supports community-level collaboratives in the work that they're doing. And offline, I can share with you the contact information, put you in touch with them. And what they'll do is, it's a small amount, but it helps to, one, show recognition for the work that's being done by community collaboratives, and it gives them an opportunity to spend that money to support the collaborative, to be able to put on events and so forth. Because all these people that are coming together voluntarily, have real jobs, have day jobs. So going out and having a meeting of other service providers, they're going out of their way. NVI will support that. Each community collaborative gets a $2,000 check once they're vetted and approved. It's not a lot of money, but it's a start. The other thing that we're doing is we're reaching out into the community to get corporate and local sponsorship and support because it's happening in their community. I'll tell you a quick story, if I might. While I was on the road in Illinois, I was on about day 9 or 10, and I had an opportunity to talk to a farmer in Illinois who happened to be a Vietnam veteran, and I was explaining to him just what you're asking about, the funding. And I was telling him that I thought that people were getting tired of pouring money into the tops of these big national veterans organizations and having it trickle down and be a fraction of what it was when it started by the time it gets to the community. And he said to me, Jim, you're talking about Virga rain. And I'd never heard the term, so I asked him to spell it. It's Virga. And so I said, tell me what it means. And he said, Virga rain is the rain that you see off in the distance, comes down in sheets, sometimes gray, sometimes black, but it's off in the distance, but it never hits the ground. It evaporates or dissipates before it hits the ground. And that's what's happening with all of these big organizations where the funding is going into these national operations, but it never hits the ground. And when there have been some scandals, not unlike what you were talking about earlier, where the money just either disappears or dissipates or evaporates. So we are recognizing that if we can tap into the community fathers, the business leaders within the community to support these collaboratives, that they not only have an interest in their own community, but they get to see where their money's being spent. So that's one of the strategies. And there are others. We have some large partners that we're working with. They've asked us to bird dog or to point out to them some of these collaboratives. And based on that principle of Virga Rain, we're telling them if you can put this money into small communities, you can have a huge impact. So we're working a number of different angles on it, Ed, but it's key that we shine the light on the good work that's being done and has been done for years, and to make sure that they're supported and recognized.
Interesting concept, Virga Rain. We're struggling over in Montana. The politicians are all pulling apart the veterans community. We have a senator that is on the key committee of Veterans Affairs, but from what we're seeing, like the Mission Continues Act, which will allow veterans to get health care in the local community, it dictates or puts the doctor right in an exam room with the federal government. There are mandates on what can and can't be done for that veteran. So one of the comments that I've got or questions is we're sitting here struggling with the nation's highest per capita suicide rate. Right now, the national average is around 35, and in Montana, we're roughly 70. So we're double the national average for veteran suicide. How do we get an organization like the Virga Rain that you were talking about started in Montana?
Other people who are as passionate as you about this issue are starting to recognize the very same things that you are, that they have to do an end run around the politicians, around the VA, to be able to support the community collaboratives. There's an operation called America's Warrior Partnership. And again, offline I'll be able to connect you to them. They just had a conference in Atlanta where they're bringing together people who are doing this, doing the work that you're describing, doing the work that we're doing here in Illinois, and they're finding ways to support them. They have corporate partners. I'll connect you to that network. They want to do the very thing that you're talking about. Illinois Joining Forces and myself personally will help in any way we can, but this is a nationwide organization that is supporting local collaboratives. So there is a movement towards this, of just literally joining forces with other states. Texas has been doing a good job. We don't have time to reinvent the wheel, so I will share with you the contacts that I have on a national basis to be able to see if we can get some resources pointed your way. But there's no question that this is the answer. It has to be done, and I think as Lincoln, I believe, was telling us, it has to be done at the community level, because some of the issues that you just described are part of the problem. When the federal government gets in, there's strings all over the place. I haven't dug into the Mission Act deep enough to know where all the pitfalls are. I do know that it's absolutely necessary that both the VA and the community-based programs are supported. They just have to. In fact, I was with the Vision 12 director yesterday, covers a wide swath of Wisconsin and Illinois and Indiana. In Vision 12, we're trying to make sure that they recognize that we got to stop competing with one another. The Mission Act, or Veterans Choice, as it was once called, is not a road toward privatization. Both have to survive. The community-based initiative has to survive along with the VA, because in rural communities in Illinois and Montana, guys and gals, veterans are nowhere near a VA, so they have to get their services at the community level, and that has to be supported financially. So we're going to dig into the Mission Act to make sure that we know where any of the pitfalls are, but we believe it has to be in. We're happy that it got funded. It looks like it could have some good elements to it. This is something that's trying to be answered in all the states in the union, and we've connected with other state partners to learn from them what they're doing and to try and get some support. I don't know who the biggest employers are in Montana. I don't know what kind of presence and operation like Walgreens. In Illinois, for example, Walgreens has over 236 stores. We're reaching out to them and saying, listen, we don't believe that the money being sent to Washington or to these big organizations is doing as much good as you think. We'd like your stores, your regional managers to look into the community to support what's happening at the community level. So that's the other thing we're doing, is identifying local, regional, and statewide corporations to get them to focus more on the community. So let me ask you, who would be kind of the Walgreens in Montana?
That's a good question that we need to have a strategy put behind. And I think it needs to be local politicians. We're talking to some, the smaller counties are the ones that get left out. Everybody runs to the big counties because that's where the biggest population, the bigger pots of money are. But at the River program, we've been seeing it's the small counties that, hey, they can afford maybe 3 or 4 deputies and a sheriff, and that's it, if they're lucky. They don't have the funding and the resources, and that's who we're reaching out to. But, the strings that are put forth not only by the federal government, but also by the state, it's strangling a lot of these smaller programs. and it makes the resources tight. And if you happen to be in favor with the politicians that are running these organizations, your program is going to thrive. If you're not, you're going to have a lot of issues in keeping going. And that's the reality that we're faced with in Montana. Well, it's been a really interesting morning. We're running out of time. Any last minute comment you want to make, Jim?
Yeah, I think the key is to stay connected, Ed. One radio interview, one conversation is not going to do it. So I'll just commit to you this. Any partner that we have, any resource that we have, any funding source that we have, we will share with you so that you can best deploy those resources on the ground there in Montana.
Well, those that are listening, you heard it here. Let's get together. Let's put together Virga Rain. Let's stomp it out. Thank you very much for your time this morning, Jim.
Thank you. Appreciate what you're doing up there, buddy. Thank you.
So thank you very much for listening to Veterans Heartbeat. We'd not be able to bring it to you without all the support of the listeners. And thank you again to Farside Signs for sponsoring the show. If you do need a unique vehicle design, swing on by and check them out. Also, thank you to our main sponsor, River. River has an array of services such as veterans-focused education, a vestibular disorder clinic, and now non-pharmaceutical treatments for pain, anxiety, and depression. Check them out on Facebook or on the web at riverofchange.org. Lastly, we'd like to show our appreciation to all of our veterans. Thank you for serving our country and keeping it safe.